Yeah, welcome to our first Introduction to Astrology class. And what we are going to do, basically cover all of the essential aspects of what you need to know to start making sense of an astrology chart. So the key elements of that are really the planets, the signs, the houses, the aspects, which will go through in turn during these weeks. And it's kind of the nature of astrology that I'll be bringing in different elements of each of these even before we've looked at them formally, because we have to learn astrology, you have to break them down into the separate bits, but you also have to kind of bring other elements into it. So that will make more sense as we go along. First session today is really going to be, firstly, a little background really to what astrology is and how it works. So, even amongst people who are practicing astrologers, everyone sees it a bit differently and does it a bit differently. And for me, well, I'll get into that. I'll talk about what it actually is for me, how I use it, why we do astrology, and then have a look at a chart. So not actually start to interpret the chart yet, but to look at breaking down what you're looking at when you look at an astrology chart, so that you can identify where the planets are, where the signs, where the houses, where the aspects, and describe a bit about the visual sense of the chart and what you're actually looking at. And then today we're also going to go through the four elements: fire, earth, air, and water, and what are called the three modes in astrology. Now, these are essentially, you have four elements and three modes. They're what make up the 12 signs of the zodiac. And so, even though there are 12 signs, there are three signs that will all relate to the element of fire, three to earth, three to air, three to water. And so even without knowing anything about the specific nature of the sign, any sign within its own element, the signs, all fire signs, for example, will have something in common. They'll express slightly differently, but fundamentally, there'll be key themes that they all share. And so to talk about the elements and then the modes is really about the kind of underpinning of the 12 signs of the zodiac. And so we talk about them before the specific signs. And that may be all we get to today. Each class is going to be up to 2 hours, and we're going to have 5 classes. Yeah, and we'll see how it goes. That partly depends on how many tangents I go off on, which happens when I teach astrology, and any questions that get asked during it. But I will try and keep each session to a maximum of 2 hours, and some may be shorter, but judging on past experience, probably not. Okay, so very, very briefly, I just want to start with a little bit about my background with astrology, how I got into it, which is also relevant to how I see and work with astrology. And, I was, for most of my life, a total skeptic about everything, actually, including astrology. I thought it was the stuff you see in newspaper and magazine horoscopes. This week or today, you're going to fall in love with somebody you meet at a bus stop kind of thing. And so I just kind of dismissed it until, well, over 10 years ago now, I just happened to sit in on a talk by an astrologer friend who blew my mind in an hour. I was like, oh, that's what astrology is. There's so much more to it. And what I really love about it is it's not a belief system. It's experiential. And after that hour of having my mind blown, I was very much went away and started looking into it, looking at my own chart, friends, family, and realized that actually there was a lot of validity to it, a huge amount. And I'm still a skeptic about most things, but I would say an open-minded skeptic. And I think it's also good to be skeptical about astrology, about anything, but to actually explore it for yourself and see if it works. So that's what I hope to do during these sessions, introduce some of these, the main themes, the main ideas, and then you go away and look more deeply into your own chart, your loved ones, and discover and decide for yourself if it fits, if it works. So, what is astrology? How does it work? Well, let me say, to begin with, the very first thing is, for me, it's not a science. It's I suppose you could call it a mystical art. It doesn't work through the logical, rational, scientific method, which is why it generally gets dismissed by scientists, because it doesn't fit their understanding of life. And I would personally say that doesn't prove that astrology doesn't work. It only proves that astrology doesn't operate by normal scientific means as we understand them. Astrology is ultimately a symbolic language, meaning that the position of the planets in the sky symbolize and describe aspects of our life, aspects of our nature, but they're not causing it. Sometimes it's understood that sort of the energy of the planets are beaming down to us on Earth and doing something to us. But that, to me, is still sort of within the realms of scientific viewpoint, cause and effect, right? But astrology isn't cause and effect based. Carl Jung coined the phrase synchronicity, right? Which is essentially an acausal connecting principle between two things, meaning that there is a relationship between them, but one is not causing the other. And a really nice, simple analogy I like for this is a clock. So the hands on a clock tell the time, but the hands are not causing the time. And astrology is like that. The position of the planets are telling the astrological time. They're describing what's going on, but they're not the cause of it. And so, it's like the sort of ancient saying, as above, so below, or the microcosm reflecting the macrocosm. So the macrocosm position of the planets reflects and describes what's going on in our life, but not causing it. And so astrology is at heart, it's subjective. Science is objective, but you can't ever really take out the observer from the observed in anything. Whatever we do in life, it's kind of like through the filter of our own personal consciousness. And you could say one's filter on the world, how one sees the world, is described by our own personal astrology chart. And there's and one other thing to say about science first is how, you could say science is within an astrology chart. There's facets of an astrology chart, for example, like the planet Mercury and the air signs, which are the realm of the objective, the logical, the rational. And so that's a part of astrology and it's a part of life, but it's not the whole picture. And so science is essentially a part of the whole, trying to describe the whole. It can't do it. And this isn't to dismiss science, right? If I want to go and build a bridge, I'm going to go to an engineer. But if I want to understand the nature of life, the universe, the cosmos, myself, the bigger picture, then science just isn't the right tool for it. And this is described, really, it's symbolized by an astrology as a whole. As a subject, astrology is geocentric, okay, meaning earth-centered. So in a chart, which we'll look at in a couple of minutes, the earth and the person is in the center and everything else revolves around that, including the sun. right? And of course, we know the sun doesn't, in objective world in the solar system, the sun doesn't revolve around the earth. But this is symbolic of the subjective or geocentric nature of astrology. We are in the middle, our consciousness, our being, whereas science and the physical solar system is heliocentric, meaning the sun is in the middle. And, you know, that's, it's a whole different system, essentially. So astrology fundamentally describes our own personal subjective experience, our personal life. And there's quite a nice little story that I like to share to kind of highlight how essentially we cannot separate ourselves from our experience and objectively observe it. And it was an experiment done by Carl Jung. And also, just to say, this also is true as an astrologer. So when I do readings for people, it's not objective because it's through the lens of my own perspective on life. So there are technical, objective aspects to astrology and doing a reading that are very important, but I also can't take myself out of the picture. And so it means that every astrologer will do astrology slightly differently based on their own personal nature, and their own perspective on things. And you know, there are certain rules, if you like, within astrology that need to be followed, but it's not a kind of 1 + 1 = 2 science. There will always be different takes that people have on it, that different astrologers have on it, that can be equally valid, but slightly different. So the Carl Jung story, Carl Jung, if you're not aware, I'm sure you know of him as a brilliant psychologist, psychiatrist, very, really pioneering work in terms of the exploration of the psyche and the depths of our psyche, and also a practicing astrologer. He used to use astrology sometimes in his sessions with clients when he was a bit stuck and needed a different angle on understanding what was going on with them. So he did this experiment about astrology one time where he was interested in a phenomenon called the cosmic marriage in astrology, which is essentially when you're looking at two people's charts, so a romantic couple essentially, and comparing their two charts. And there's three main ways in which there's said to be a cosmic marriage between the charts, which is to say, like a very, very strong signature of deep connection. And if you don't have a cosmic marriage, it doesn't mean that it's not a good relationship, but these things often show up in couples charts. And I won't get into the technicalities of specifically what the three things mean right now, but essentially it's where one person's sun is conjunct. Conjunct means essentially on top of, very, very close to the other person's moon. So sun conjunct moon is one way you can have a cosmic marriage. One person's moon on top of the other moon, conjunct the other's moon, is the second way. And moon conjunct ascendant between the charts is the third way. Don't worry too much about the specifics of what this actually means right now, but the story is to highlight this subjective, not being able to separate yourself from what you're doing. Because what happened was Jung had, I don't know, several hundred couples charts that he analyzed to see if statistically any of these factors showed up between all the couples. And he had 3 female assistants helping him collate all the information. And what happens was when he got all of the charts back and he looked at them as one big group, he found that there was no statistical relevance for any of these three factors in all his charts that he analyzed. So kind of showing that science and doing statistical analysis on astrology didn't work. But what he then did was he separated the hundreds of charts into three piles based on, according to the three female assistants that helped him with the study. And what he found was in the first pile, statistically significant was the sun conjunct moon. So the first factor out of the three possible ways of getting a cosmic marriage. This one was statistically significant. In the second pile, he found the second factor was statistically significant, moon conjunct moon. And in the third pile, the third factor, moon conjunct ascendant. And what's really cool about this was when he then looked at his three female assistants' charts, the one who had the first pile, she had a cosmic marriage with her husband of sun conjunct moon. And that was what was reflected in her pile of charts that she collated for Jung. And so that factor showed up as statistically significant, reflecting the person involved in getting the information. And in the second pile, the same thing. The woman had, his assistant had moon conjunct moon with her husband. And that was reflected in her pile. And of course, yes, in the third pile, the third woman had the third factor, moon conjunct ascendant, with her husband. And that showed up as significant in the charts that she analyzed or she collated the information for. And so there was a factor showing up in the study in each of these separate piles reflective of the person involved in the study. But when taken as one big whole and all collated together, it didn't make any sense. And so this is the kind of symbolic way that astrology works, is that there is very, very profound relevance. And often, you know, in this case, there was like a message and a learning for Jung in doing this study of showing him, yes, there's validity to astrology, but it doesn't work in the way that you think. And that as soon as you try and separate yourself from it, then it's just not relevant. It doesn't show up. And, you know, other statistical studies have tried to be done on astrology over the years, and for the most part have failed disastrously. And like I say, that's scientific proof for the scientists that astrology doesn't work, rather than stopping to think maybe it works in a different way than we understand life, essentially. So it's one of my favorite astrology stories, just to kind of highlight that it's valid, it's relevant, it works, but it's this mysterious, mystical art, essentially, that can't be put into boxes of, you know, just pure logical, rational thought. So, yeah, I mean, essentially for me, the point of astrology is as a tool for helping us understand ourselves and our lives better and moving in harmony with what life wants for us. You know, you could look at it that astrology describes a world, a universe, a life experience that is a mixture of fate and free will, in a sense. The fate is your chart is as it is, you know, so the key themes of one's life, the key challenges, the key gifts, all of the important information is kind of as latent potential in the birth chart. And that in itself is fixed. And yet the free will is, there's a million possible expressions of one chart, from what you could call the lower expression of the planets and the signs in one's chart to the higher expression. And, you know, so for me, life is about growth and learning and personal growth, spiritual growth, moving towards, through the astrological perspective, the highest possible expression that we can of our chart. And that's the free will. And the same in terms of timings of things. You know, you can look at the movements of the planets and see, okay, these themes are going to come up at this particular time. I'm going to have these kinds of challenges, but you can't really predict exactly what that will look like in the outside world. But what you can use it for is an understanding of, this is what life is wanting me to learn right now. These are the ways in which I can move in harmony with the universe and, you know, learn the lessons as quickly and smoothly as possible. You know, as a very logical, rational, analytical Virgo that I am, when I first started studying astrology, I thought, from my mind's perspective, it's like, wow, I've got all the answers to the universe here. And basically, I can use this to avoid any problems, to just get life to go exactly how I want it to go, when I want it to go, all the time. And in many ways, over many years, astrology and life keeps proving to me that's not the case. It's like, you know, I see I have a certain transit coming up. It's like, oh, these are the lessons. You know, for example, Neptune transit, beware of like confusion and delusion and not seeing reality. And I know it's coming and I still fall into it. But with astrology, generally I remember quicker. It's like Neptune again. And yeah, basically it's like, okay, I'm not really in control of the big picture of my life, but I also have to play my part and show up and do the best I can and move in harmony with things. And for me, astrology is the best guide for what's required generally in my life, in one's life, and at any particular time. You know, I really feel like it's the most potent system for understanding all of the energies behind whatever's happening, both on the global scale and on the personal level. And, you know, it's like a peek behind the manifest reality of this world to help understand the underlying forces, themes, energies at play. And so, you know, it doesn't mean that we can avoid all of the difficulties of life, but it can certainly bring much deeper meaning and understanding to the events that happen. And as I've keep repeating, move in harmony with what life is really asking of us. And the last thing I want to say in terms of this little kind of introduction to the philosophical spiel of astrology is just to mention 3 very common words in the English language that are actually derived from, rooted in astrology, and give a different flavor really to what they really mean, or the essence of what the word was originally about. You know, in general, I'm fascinated by etymology, the origins of words, and there's so much wisdom and knowledge in what are like very common words today that have kind of often lost their essential meaning. So the first of these words is consider. Consider comes from the Latin, con means with, sider from sidereal means the stars. So consider really means with the stars. And so essentially, when one considers something, contemplates it, reflects on it, it's like, is this with the stars? Which is another way of saying, is this in harmony with what astrology describes of what life is asking for me at this time? And, you know, opposing that, the word disaster comes from dis astro, which means against the stars. And so, when we have a disaster, you could look at it like, I've gone against what's in my best interest. Or even, disaster, it's what we see as disaster isn't necessarily always in the long term a disaster. And so, it's like, yeah, our free will is to ideally always go with the stars, but even in disaster, we can learn, oh, this is where I'm fighting against reality, essentially, by going against the stars or wanting things to be different, because the stars, which is another way of saying what, like the flow of the universe, the flow of life, God's will, if you want to see it that way. That's what essentially astrology is describing. The third word is desire, which comes from the Latin desideri, which means of the stars. Okay, and so often what we're doing really when we're practicing astrology and looking at a chart and making decisions using astrology is asking the question, is this my true desire? Which is another way of saying, is this what the stars want? Is this in harmony with divine will? Desire essentially means divine will, which, as I look at it, equates to, is the same as our own deepest soul's wish, our true desire, which isn't always in harmony with what we think we want or what on a more superficial level we want, which I don't know about anyone else, but for me is to have a nice, easy, smooth, flowing, wonderful life every minute of every day. Certainly not my experience, but that's like my superficial desire, if you like. But you could say one's true desire, one's soul desire is what astrology can describe. And that is, of the stars, divine will. And so ideally, astrology is about helping us move in alignment with divine will, our own soul's deeper desire. So as an introduction and as a background to this, what we're going to look at, that's all I want to say on that. If anyone has any questions on that at this point, please feel free to either unmute yourself and ask a question or type a question in the chat box. For those who joined just after the beginning, I just want to say something that I said at the beginning, that basically you're welcome to ask questions at any point. Just please know that this is being recorded, both for you to watch back afterwards if you want, and for those of us who can't join us live. So if you don't want to appear in the recording, either your voice or image, but you still want to ask questions, then please type it in the chat box and I'll read it there and can answer the question from that. And if you don't mind your image or voice appearing, you're welcome to just unmute yourself and ask the question at any point. Actually, I'll periodically do this and say any questions, but if you've got a burning question at any point, you're welcome to interrupt me. I would rather you do that than sit there and be confused or just be thinking about what you want to ask. Okay, so let's move on to looking at a chart. So let me see, I need to share my screen with you. Okay, one question. How detailed of an understanding does one need of astrology in order to follow/read one's chart on a regular basis in terms of what's happening astrologically? How deep of an... So I suppose the simple answer is the more detailed knowledge you have, the more understanding you'll have. But even it's like, I suppose this is also a bigger thing about what I want to say about astrology is astrology is insanely complex, and it just gets more and more complicated and more like just more and more layers. However, just knowing a little bit of the basics can be really, really helpful in terms of, um, understanding the essence of oneself and one's life. And so, yes, the more you know, the more you can use it. But even just knowing a bit about particularly the sun sign, moon sign, and ascendant, these are like the sort of backbone of a chart. And so, if the question is asking about like when you look at somebody's description of monthly, say, cycles and what's happening for one sign this month, if you just know, you might have seen those, people do descriptions of for an Aries this month, these are the things to look out for. And even though that's general, there's a lot of often very valid astrological information in that, and they're worth looking at. But what I would say with that is look at the one for your ascendant sign, your rising sign, rather than your sun sign, because in the way that form of astrology is done, the sort of monthly, these are the themes to look out for, these are the areas of your life that are in focus, it's based on the houses of the chart, and the houses are tied to the ascendant more than they're tied to the sun sign. So if you're following that kind of monthly astrology, look at your rising sign. If the question is more about sort of the global picture, this is what's happening for everyone at this time, then what you'll learn during these sessions will be enough for that to make a lot more sense, because that's based on sort of on the global picture. It's more what you're looking at is the essential themes of the planets and signs, what they at their core relate to, and what's happening with them this month, this year. And so, through this course, you're going to have a good understanding of the essential archetypes and realms of each of those. If you want to get into like really detailed, like what's happening in my life in terms of specific personal transits for the next year, that requires more detailed understanding. But again, even a little bit. So even if for example, I'm having a Saturn transit this year, you're going to understand a lot about the essence of what Saturn brings to us through this 5 sessions. And so, it's like the nuances and the specifics and the more detailed stuff, you need to know a lot of astrology for. But to know like just the very basic, simple archetype of what Saturn represents, if you know Saturn's in your sign, for example, or where it is in your chart in a particular time, you'll be able to know a lot about the essence of what that's going to feel like and what themes it's bringing just from this introduction. That was a very long answer to a short question, but I hope it made some kind of sense. Okay, so let's have a look at a chart. Let me share my screen with you. How do I do this? Here we go. Okay. Raise a hand if you can see an astrology chart on your screen right now. Okay, good. So this is just a random chart, actually. It's no one's chart in particular. But what I want to do in this section is give you an idea of what on earth you're looking at when you look at all this chart and how to start identifying not yet the meanings of everything, but just step one, being able to identify everything. Actually, firstly, I'm going to change this because I've got a slide here that's got some symbols on it. So you can see on the left here, here's just some of the key symbols for each of the planets and the signs. Oh, and I also want to say at this point, when I talk about the planets, I include the sun and the moon. Now, of course, I know they're not actual physical planets, and it's a shorthand. It saves me saying every time the planets and the sun and the moon, because while they're not physical planets, each of the bodies in the solar system relates to a particular archetype or sort of universal energy, sort of latent potential, particular theme. And so the sun and the moon are grouped with the planets because they fall into this particular, well, it's the what energy in a chart, right? So very simply, a planet, including the sun and the moon, is what energy are we talking about? What archetype? What essential part of our nature? What essential part of life? The signs of the zodiac are the how. How is that energy expressed? It's like a field of energy. And the houses are the where, which area of life. That will make more sense later, but that's essentially how they're divided. You have a what, a how, and a where. And the fourth area of the chart, the aspects, is the connections between the planets, how the different energies relate. So what, how, where. Okay, so when we're looking at the chart here, essentially, if this is your birth chart, you are standing in the middle. This is the subjective view of the heavens from the moment you were born at the place you were born. And so you are in the middle, and the horizontal line going across the middle is essentially the horizon. So anything above the horizon was literally above the horizon in the sky when you were born. And everything under the horizon was under the earth when you were born. So this is symbolic of your personal worldview, your subjective view of life. You know, again, it's geocentric. You are in the middle. It's not an objective reality. It's your subjective life experience. I think you could make a very good case for the fact that there is no objective reality out there because nobody's ever found it. You know, it's anything we experience is through our own consciousness, and so is subjective. And I don't know a lot about it, but I believe even quantum physics talks about this kind of thing these days, of how when you do an experiment, the observer influences the result of the experiment. Okay, so I just wanted to check, can you see my little arrow moving around on the screen here? Yes, good. So I'm going to start breaking down the aspects of the chart with this ring of symbols here. So not in the far outside of the chart, but in this middle section. I was just pointing with my finger, but that doesn't really work online. Do it with the arrow. In this middle section of the chart, these symbols here, where my arrow's going, these are all the planets. So you can, if you look in the top left here and you see the key, like for example, the crescent is the moon. So here's the moon. Next to it on its left is Saturn, Pluto, and Jupiter on its right. So this is where you'll always find the planets on the outer edge of this particular section of the chart. Now, let's take the moon as an example and move towards the center. So you'll see the symbol for the planet. You'll see a number. you'll see another symbol, which is a sign, and another number. Okay. And you'll see each of the planets has this symbol, number, symbol, number. So the symbol, first of all, is the sign of the zodiac that the planet is in. So in this case, you have Moon in Capricorn. You see the symbol for Capricorn down here. You have Mars in Aries, to take another example. And the sun down here is in the sign of Cancer, which there's the sign of Cancer. So, you know, when somebody says, I'm a Cancer, that means their sun sign, their sun was in the sign of Cancer when they were born. And you know that if this is a person's chart, because here's the sun and here's Cancer between those two numbers. That's really important to stress. To know the sign that a planet is in any chart, you have to look to the symbol between the two numbers. Somebody's not seeing the symbols in the lower part of the screen. You mean where my arrow is down here, like not seeing the whole chart, or the symbols at the side, the key?
I'm not seeing the key, like the symbols at the side.
Oh, thank you. You are, I changed, oh man, I changed what I was showing on the screen, but I think you're still all looking at a different aspect, a different page on my screen. Give me one, so sorry about that. Give me 1 second. Thanks for pointing that out before I went on any longer and confused the hell out of you even more. Now, technology. Okay, let me put the right thing on the screen. That would be helpful. Where is it? Where is it? That's so weird. Technology is brilliant until you can't figure something out. Let me try this. So, are you guys looking at another chart now with a key on the left-hand side? Okay, let me just do a brief recap of what I was saying so that it so that it actually this is really tricky. I'm trying to show a slideshow and Zoom. All right, I think we're good. So we're all looking at the right image now. Good. Just checking, yeah? You've got the key on the left? Yeah, okay. So this is what I was talking about and you weren't looking at. Here's the moon, the crescent, in the sign of Capricorn, and each of the planets around the outside of this particular section of the chart. So this symbol is Jupiter, Pluto, Moon, Saturn, Neptune, Mars. And to know which sign of the zodiac any planet is in, you have to look at this symbol between the two numbers. It always goes outside to in. So for now, you'll see around the very outside symbols for the signs of the zodiac. Ignore them for now. We're going to come to them in a minute. But these symbols between the two numbers next to the planet will tell you which sign every planet is in. So this is what I was trying to point at before. Down the bottom, here's the sun in the sign of Cancer. And this is the essential thing to look at in a chart to know which sign a planet is in. This sign between the two numbers. So, you know, you've got the key over here. So if we take this example, this symbol is the planet on the outside. It's Venus in the sign of Gemini, the twins here, Venus in Gemini, Mars in Aries, Jupiter in Capricorn, etc. So That's the sign the planet was in. The two numbers are, the numbers get more relevant the deeper you get into astrology. Initially, generally speaking, what matters is the sign it's in. The numbers represent where specifically in that sign of the zodiac the planet is. So if you remember from many years ago at school, a circle has 360 degrees in it, right? There are 12 signs of the zodiac. So each sign of the zodiac has 30 degrees. And a planet can be anywhere within that 30 degrees of a sign. And so the moon is at 27 degrees of Capricorn. Okay. And the second number, the smaller number, is the fraction of a degree. These are called the minutes, technically, minutes of a degree. And they go up to 60 like a clock. It doesn't go up to 100, but 60. So the moon would said to be at 27 degrees and 10 minutes of Capricorn. Mars would be said to be at 4 degrees and 49 minutes of Aries. And if you see in terms of the fraction of a degree, they never go, 58 is the highest. You can't get 65, 70. As soon as it gets 58, 59, and then it moves to the next degree. So, like I say, for the beginning astrology, the fraction of a degree is not so important. It gets more important when you go deeper, and particularly when you're looking at transits, which is the movement of the planets in the sky right now to a planet in a birth chart. Then you need to know exactly at what degree that planet is to know when that transit is going to happen. And also, by the way, the degrees also become important once we start talking about aspects, which is the interrelationship between the planets. And the aspects are shown in this chart by this mass of lines in the middle of the chart here. So the aspects are based on geometrical relationships. And we'll get more into the specifics in further classes. But just to know that's what you're looking at in the middle of the chart is which planet is connected with which other planet and how, essentially. There are, to put it simply, challenging connections and harmonious connections. And they're shown by the different kinds of aspects you have. And essentially, where you have a challenging aspect, that will bring out the lower nature of the planets involved more easily. So, as I said earlier, everything in a chart has the potential for the lower and higher expression, a whole spectrum of possibilities. And if there's any kind of goal in life, I think it's ideally to move towards the higher end of those spectrums. But where you have challenging connections between the planets, they generally bring challenges in life. And so where the lower natures tend to come out more easily, and we have to work hard to express the higher end of the spectrum of the planets involved. And, you know, also as a general statement, where you have harmonious flowing connections between planets, which here are shown by the blue lines. Again, don't worry about the specifics too much at this point. They generally signify a particular gift or something that just comes naturally or easily to us. We don't have to work so hard at. The higher nature of the planets involved generally come out more easily. Yeah, there's a lot more to say about the aspects, but for now, just looking at the chart, that's what's going on in the middle. We're looking at the interrelationships between the planets. And then what we haven't looked at yet or identified is the houses. So we got the planet in a sign. The houses are signified by these 12 segments of the chart with the numbers running 1 to 12 anti-clockwise around the chart. And so, as I said, the houses are where they're like areas of life. So you could say that a planet in a sign is like a latent potential, a possibility of energy. The houses are related to planet Earth. They're the where, so they bring these potentials down to Earth. You know, you could say no houses, no events. So the houses of a chart indicate what particular area of life is being triggered, activated by the position of the planets. And, you know, essentially you have 12 houses, and pretty much any kind of life experience you can think of will fit into the signification of one of the 12 houses. And so, you know, by extrapolation, each house can relate to what more than one particular theme. But yeah, that's essentially what the houses are, the areas of life. And just to give you a very brief introduction, number one, the first house, this whole area of the chart here is me. It's the most personal area of the chart, whereas the house opposite it, the seventh house, relates to the realm and themes of relationships somehow. So if this is me, the seventh house is you or the other. It's like opposite. And so things going on in this house will relate to all kinds of important relationships in our life. And if you know, if you've studied or heard or read any kind of astrology, you will have probably heard about the ascendant or the rising sign. Okay. And that's, generally speaking, the sun and the moon, what's happening with them in our charts, along with the rising sign, aka the ascendant, are the three most important areas of a chart. And, you know, when we're talking about the sun, it's not just the sign that the sun is in, you know, because not all cancers are the same person or have the same life experience. This is where you start going more deeply into different levels of astrology, because the sun is in Cancer, but it's also in a particular house and making connections to particular planets, other planets in the chart. So those are two of several, many ways in which astrology starts to get more specific from just, I'm a Cancer. You know, I'm a Cancer, but what house is my sun in? What other aspects? What connections to which other planets does the sun make? And actually a whole load of other stuff beyond the scope of this introduction course all serve to get more and more specific in different facets of one's sun nature. And, you know, for that matter, everything else in the chart. Yeah, so back to the ascendant. So the ascendant is this horizontal line here that begins the first house. So it could be said to be the beginning of the chart, if a circle can have a beginning. And the ascendant is basically the point of the horizon. So at the moment you were born, if you imagine you're in the middle here, what was on the eastern horizon is what your ascendant is. So whichever sign of the zodiac was there at that time is your rising sign or your ascendant sign. So if you happen to be born, I'm going to flip back to the other chart because I want to demonstrate something by moving the chart around. So let's just switch this over. I'm assuming this is all making sense so far. I don't see any questions. Just a reminder to do ask them if something isn't making sense. Okay. So hopefully you should be seeing another chart on your screen that doesn't have the symbols on the left-hand side. Okay, good. So when we take this example, and this is relevant to the ascendant, in this particular chart, you see the sun here very close to the ascendant. If you want to get specific, the sun is 26 degrees of Cancer. The ascendant here, oh, and by the way, I didn't say, but this shows the sign on the ascendant. Yeah, the sign to the left of that horizontal line. And like with the planets, it has two numbers, one number either side of it, showing the degree and the fraction of a degree. So the ascendant here, that's the symbol for Cancer, is at 22 degrees of Cancer. Now, in the top right, you might see what time this chart is. And this is actually today's chart at 6 a.m., 06. And so that is very close to sunrise in the location for this chart. So if you were born at sunrise, it means the sun was literally on the horizon when you were born. And so your sun and your ascendant would be the same. Okay. And, you know, that goes for any planet on the ascendant. If we take it back an hour to 5 a.m., this symbol is Mercury. Mercury is right on the ascendant here. So that means literally, if you were able to see the planet at that time, Mercury would be right on the horizon, eastern horizon, when you were born. So what's really important to understand about a chart, and not necessarily super easy to grasp when you first look at it, but what you have is two different cycles superimposed onto each other. It's like a 3D map squished into 2D. Okay. So the two cycles are the planets in the signs, so the sun here in Cancer, and the planets in the houses, these 12 segments of the chart. And they are two completely different cycles, which I will demonstrate by moving the chart around. So the planets in the signs move, well, they move at very different speeds, okay? And they are based on the relative speeds of either, in the moon's case, the moon's orbit of the Earth, or the other planets' orbits around the sun. So each planet will essentially go all the way through the zodiac, through the 12 signs of the zodiac at different cycles. So the moon, what I'll do is, let's move it back to a new moon. So this is pretty much a new moon, which essentially means the sun and the moon are in the same place as seen from the Earth. Okay, so the sun being the circle with the dot in it, and the moon the crescent symbol. And I'll move the chart forward one day at a time and watch the moon. So here the moon is in Cancer. If I move it forward one day, you see it's gone down here to Leo. And I keep moving it forwards one day. And you see the moon going all the way around the chart. So this is close to the full moon now. The moon is opposite the sun from the perspective of the Earth. That's what a full moon is. And so here the moon is in the sign of Aquarius. The sun is in the opposite sign of Leo. And keep moving it forwards, and pretty soon we get back to the next new moon, the sun being next to the moon. So in terms of the signs of the zodiac, the moon will move through all 12 signs of the zodiac in a lunar month, essentially, more or less 28 and a half days, 29 days. I should know that. something like that, is new moon to new moon. And the sun will go all the way around the chart once every year. And because that's how we time 1 year in the solar system, it's the Earth's orbit around the sun, right? It takes 1 year. And so from the position of the Earth, which is what the chart is, the sun takes 1 year to go through each sign of the zodiac. So again, if I move it forward 1 day and you watch the sun here, which is at 25 degrees of Leo right now, next day 26, 27, 28, 29, and then it moves into Virgo. So that's the sun's movement through the signs of the zodiac is almost exactly 1 degree of the zodiac per day. We have 365 days usually in a year, and there are 360 degrees in a circle. So 1 degree a day. So the sun spends roughly 1 month in each sign of the zodiac, roughly 30 days. And each of the other planets will have their own travel speed through the signs of the zodiac based on how close they are to the Earth, to the sun, really. So the further out you go, the slower the planets move. So Jupiter's orbit around the sun takes 12 years. So that means Jupiter moving through each of the signs of the zodiac will take 12 years, which means it will spend roughly 12 months, 1 year in each sign of the zodiac. Jupiter's currently in Capricorn, and about halfway through it, it's at 18 degrees. So roughly speaking, you could say Jupiter's been in Capricorn for the last 6 months and will be for another 6 months. And the further out you go, the slower the planets move. So Saturn, takes 29 years to orbit the Earth, to orbit the sun. And so 29 years to go all the way around the chart through the signs. All the way out to Pluto, whose orbit is 248 years. And so, let's say you live until you're 80 years old. In your entire life, Pluto will only move around about a third of the chart. So very, very slowly. That's just to give you an idea of the relative speeds through the signs of the zodiac. And so, the sun, the moon, Mercury, Venus, and Mars, which are collectively called the personal planets, which we'll talk more about later, move relatively quickly. Mars is the slowest of those, takes about 2 years to go through each sign of the zodiac. And then the further out you get, the slower they go. So that's the cycle of the planets in the signs. Now, the planets in the houses is a completely different thing. And this is very much... So the first one, the planets in the signs, is based on the relative orbits around the sun, or the Earth's orbit around the moon. The moon's orbit around the Earth. The movement through the houses is based on the Earth's rotation on its axis. So that's a 24-hour cycle. What that basically means is every planet will go through every house in the chart once at every 24 hours. So while they move at completely different speeds through the signs, the planets move at the same speed through the houses. And like I say, this is based on the Earth spinning on its own axis once every 24 hours. So to show you that, I'm going to move the chart forward an hour at a time. Before I was moving it days at a time. And the planets move clockwise through the houses. If you remember, the flow of the moon through the signs was anti-clockwise. But in this other cycle, so here we are at sunrise, 6 a.m. You know it's sunrise because the sun is right on the ascendant. So watch the sun and all the other planets as I move the chart forward 1 hour at a time. So 7 a.m., the sun has risen up to here. 8, 9, 10, 11. At midday, the sun is right at the top of the chart, which, you know, you think you're in the middle here. It basically means the sun is at its highest point in the sky, more or less at midday. And as you keep going through the day and you get to sunset, around 6 p.m., here's the sun on the opposite side of the chart. It's just gone below the horizon. And if you pick the movement of any planet, so if we follow Saturn here, move it forward an hour at a time, you see it moves at the same speed through the houses. And so this is why your ascendant sign and which houses the planets are in are very, very closely tied to what time of day you were born. And so, you know, if you were born at sunrise, your sun would be over here in the first house. If you were born at sunset, it would be over here in the seventh house. And so, you know, that makes for a very different chart and a very different life. So your essential nature, the sign that the sun is in, probably won't change during those 12 hours. It's possible, but, you know, in most 12-hour periods, it doesn't happen. But the fact that the houses change mean that the areas of life that are most prominent and most triggered and most important to you in your life are very different. So, you know, this is why astrologers always ask for as precise a birth time as you can get, so that you can know both your ascendant, your rising sign, and which houses of the chart each of the planets are in. Does that make sense? You know, essentially you've got, like I say, two very different cycles superimposed on each other and squished into a 2D chart. And so, you know, it's good to recognize that these are two very different things. The planet is in a sign and the planet is in a house. And the houses are very, very much determined by the time of day you were born. Okay, so for now, that's the introduction to the visual looking at a chart and how to identify a planet in a sign and the houses and the aspects and how they all move. And I'll give you a moment to ask any questions on that if anyone has any, and then I'll move on to the first specifics that we're going to look at of the chart, which is the 4 elements. And for this, I'm going to need my wonderful slideshow. Okay, we have a question. The planet in the sign moves anti-clockwise and the planet in the house moves clockwise. Yes, that is correct. So, like I say, it's 2 motions happening simultaneously. Through the houses, as time goes during one day, the planets will all move clockwise through the houses. At the same time, at a much slower rate, they're also moving anti-clockwise through the signs. And so, you know, the movement through the signs you see over the longer period, over days and weeks and months, depending on which planet, and that will always be happening anti-clockwise. Whereas every 24 hours, all planets move clockwise through the entire 360 degrees, and so each of the houses of the chart. Okay. And another question, before we had computers to generate charts, did it take a long time to draw one? Yes. I did this when I was learning astrology just for the experience of hand calculating a chart. And yes, it takes a long time. I think once you get really good, if you're doing that all the time, you could probably do one in an hour. I think when I did it, it took me most of the day because it was new to me. Yeah. Once you're good, you could probably do it in an hour. And with a computer, 5 seconds. Thank you, computers. Okay, let's get my presentation on the screen. Share screen. All right, everyone looking at what do you call it? Like a cover image for the slideshow? Okay. So let's talk about the 4 elements. So firstly, as I said at the beginning, the 4 elements, it's one of the fundamental sort of symbolic, energetic building blocks of life. Okay. So in a way, I think everything in this world can be categorized at a core level by one of the elements. And certainly every person can be. And, that's fire, earth, air, or water. And I'm going to go through each one in turn, but essentially, as I also said earlier, this is one of the foundational ways in which we create the 12 signs of the zodiac. So each sign of the zodiac relates to one of the 4 elements, which means you have 3 signs related to each element. As you're seeing on your screen, fire is Aries, Leo, and Sagittarius. Earth is Taurus, Virgo, and Capricorn. Air is Gemini, Libra, and Aquarius. And water is the signs of Cancer, Scorpio, and Pisces. As a kind of bottom line essence, the fire realm is the realm of like action and energy and doing. Earth is the realm of the physical world, the physical earth, and so is about like practical stuff. Air is the realm of the mind, the intellect, and all social interactions between people, communication. And water is the realm of feelings and emotions. That's kind of like the bottom line, what each element relates to. What was I going to say? Yeah, so each of the signs of the zodiac related to their particular element that sign of the zodiac will be attuned to that realm, and in slightly different ways because they're different signs of the zodiac, but they'll all fundamentally have that in common. And when it comes to a person's chart, one's own nature, there's 2 ways in which you can assess what your predominant element is, really. One is to just look at your sun sign. And so whichever of the elements your sun sign falls in, if you're a Gemini, you could be said to be an air person because the sun is fundamentally symbolic of our deepest personal nature, identity, and essence. But it's also only one part of our nature. So in a way, the more accurate, or better said, the more detailed way to look at your elemental makeup is to look at where the whole of the chart falls. So the sun is in a particular sign, everything else is. You can look at the elemental balance of the chart as a whole, excluding the 3 outer planets, Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto, because they move so slowly. They're in the same sign of the zodiac for many years. And so everyone born within, well, in the case of Neptune, everyone born within 14 years of each other will have Neptune in the same sign of the zodiac. So those outer planets are not such a personal influence on us. We'll talk more about the difference in the planet section, but just in terms of looking at one's elemental makeup, we look at fundamentally, most importantly, the sun, the moon, and the ascendant or the rising sign. Which elements are those in? You know, for some people, they would be 3 different elements. And so then a person has a mixture of each of those natures. Somebody might have like all 3 in one element, then they're really strong. You have 3, your sun, your moon, and your ascendant all in fire, then you're a really strong, like uber fire type person. And this is a bit technical, it's a bit Virgoan, but I give you my scoring system so that if you want to look at and assess the specific elemental makeup of any chart, this isn't a hard and fast rule, but this is the scoring system I use to denote the relative importance of the different planets in the chart. For the element that your sun, your moon, and your ascendant are in, you get 3 points for that element. For Mercury, Venus, and Mars, 2 points, and Jupiter and Saturn, 1 point. And if I remember rightly, that will give you a score out of 17, which is not a particularly nice round number. But then you would, if you count them up, you might get a score of like fire 8, earth 3, air 6, water 0, or any other combination. And that will give you a sense of the relative makeup of your essential nature in terms of the elements. So let's talk about them one in turn and give a sense of what each of them means. Jupiter, answering a question, Jupiter and Saturn score 1 point each. So sun, moon, and ascendant, most important, 3 points. Mercury, Venus, Mars, 2 points. Jupiter and Saturn, 1. The outer planets, nothing, because they're not relevant to us personally in terms of the signs they're in. They are relevant in other ways, but not in terms of the signs. So fire, Aries, Leo, and Sagittarius. Here's a list on your screen of keywords of what the fire element is essentially about. And as it shows, fire is the realm of creativity, passion, excitement, enthusiasm. You meet somebody with a lot of fire in their chart, you can kind of usually feel a certain level of intensity. They're more animated, often more outgoing, sort of radiating energy. Fire is essentially the creative impulse, right? If you think Aries being the first sign of the zodiac and a fire sign, I always think of the Big Bang, symbolically or literally. That's kind of like the nature of Aries. It's the beginning of something, and it's like this creative explosion of energy. And so fire people generally are their realm, their element, their modus operandi is about taking action, starting new things, like being very self-motivated, self-driven. It's the most independent generally of all the elements. And when it comes to the lower expressions of either the elements or the signs of the zodiac, it's generally the case that when something is done to excess, you get the lower nature of what's being described. So in the case of a fire person, their gift is being independent and being able to do their own thing and make things happen for themselves. Taken too far, fire people can be self-absorbed, self-centered, only think about themselves, or have a really hard time accepting help from others. They're just so self-oriented. Just to let you know, my puppy has come to join the session. Hey, puppy. And she's now licking my feet. Self-oriented, yes. And the other thing that fire people can struggle with is slowing down or stopping, and can lead to burnout because it's just go, 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 go. And overdone to excess can be, yeah, then they crash, essentially. Yeah, in a sort of mythological context, fire was seen as being the realm of the gods. And so, you know, fire people often feel themselves as almost like this sort of natural channel for life itself, for the divine spark, the creative impulse. And so generally have a lot of creative gifts, creative abilities. But like I say, if that gets taken too far, that the sort of, rather than being a channel for this energy, it can be more like self-importance and I'm better than everyone else. Yeah, that can be the spectrum on which fire people operate. And like I say, again, that can be just a sun in fire, but a more accurate representation would be the chart as a whole and the balance as a whole. I got an example of a very fiery person for you, which, since nobody here is British, you're probably going to have no idea who this is. This man's name is Isambard Kingdom Brunel, and he was a British civil engineer around the time of the beginning of the Industrial Revolution. Pretty much considered one of the most ingenious, prolific figures in the history of engineering. He was famous for building bridges, tunnels, railways. This is a picture of one of his most famous constructions. It's called the Clifton Suspension Bridge in Bristol, England. Built in 18 something, at its time was the largest bridge, or at least single span bridge in the world. Like a true pioneering, kind of like set the stage for these giant structures throughout history. And so this is the first example chart we're going to look at. This is Isambard Kingdom Brunel's chart. He was born in 1806, and we're not going to look much at it, but I just want to point out a few things so you start to get a feel for identifying the key aspects in a chart. The circle with the dot in it is his sun. As you can see by this symbol, was in Aries. So he was an Aries, a fire sign. You know, really fitting of him being a pioneer, being the one out in front. There's other more complex aspects of his chart which go more into detail about how he kind of became a leading figure in a specific field like engineering. But for now, we're just looking at the fire in his chart. His sun is in Aries. His Mars is also in Aries, and his moon and ascendant are both in fire signs. So if we just stick to sun, moon, ascendant, the big three, sun in Aries, moon in Sagittarius here, and Sagittarius ascendant, this symbol here. So he's a triple fire. And by the way, a handy hint, if you don't know yet which signs relate to which element, in these charts, the symbols are color-coded. So you can see the fire signs here are shown in red. Aries is shown in red. Sag is shown in red. Leo is up here in red. So fire is red. Earth is this kind of, what would you call it? Sort of yellowy, goldy brown color. This color is for each of the signs of earth element. This is Capricorn. Virgo, you can see the same color, and down here, Taurus, the same color. Air signs are shown in light blue. So here you have Libra in light blue, and Aquarius in light blue, and over here, Gemini in light blue. And finally, water signs are shown in dark blue. Here, Scorpio, Pisces, and Cancer here, the three water signs. So yeah, so Brunel, all of this fire, aside from being somebody who was kind of this pioneer and out in front and making things happen, you know, not everyone's going to be a leader in their field, even if they have a lot of fire in their chart. But I wrote down a few quotes from him that kind of say something about his personal nature, very fitting of different aspects of the fire realm, spoken in quite quaint 19th century English. He says, well, his first quote is simply, "I'm rarely much under 20 hours a day at it." So he worked at least 16 and often 20 hours a day, every day for, well, 6 days a week for decades, which is kind of like the fire nature of just having to keep going and going and going. He also said, befitting of somebody overdoing the fire element, which he's going to do with so much fire, "As to my character, my self-conceit renders me domineering, intolerant, nay, even quarrelsome with those who do not flatter." Basically, he was aware of being self-conceited and didn't care because he didn't really care what anyone else thought or anyone else felt. So, you know, this is a good example of the extreme expression of the fire nature. And, you know, a lot of the examples that I use will be like that. It's not to say that everyone who's a fire person will express these traits, but there will be an element of that in their fire nature that may not be expressed to the same extreme, but there'll always be a bit of, you know, someone with a lot of fire, what I feel is most important, what I want is most important. Okay, so that's a brief introduction to the realm of fire. The earth realm, which is Taurus, Virgo, and Capricorn. Some key words for earth for you. You know, very fittingly, earth is the realm of the tangible physical world of form. So anyone with a lot of earth in their chart will innately be concerned with real world practical result. You know, fire's like, I just want to do an act for the hell of it because of this creative spark. Earth is always like, why? Why are we doing this? What's going to be the result? And always attuned to, practical, real world, physical something. And so Earth people are often especially attuned to both the physical body and the physical senses, because anything that's sort of tangible, material, physical is the earth realm. So as a generalization, but generally a generally true generalization, earth people are grounded, sensible, hardworking, and practical. In its lower form can be overly materialistic, overly serious, or overly cautious. You know, it can be like, all that matters is the results if it goes too far, or it can be like super rigid, like sticking to the rules no matter what. This is the rule, and so this is how we do it. Earth people are often also especially tuned to nature, to Mother Earth. You know, that's of the three earth signs, that's especially often true of Tauruses. Taurus is very much the sign related to Mother Nature. And Taurus is especially like attuned to the physical senses and attuned to, actually all earth signs very much attuned to the rhythms and cycles of life. My example for the earth realm is this guy, who you may recognize. Lance Armstrong, how would you describe him? 7-time winner of the Tour de France cycling race, later disgraced drug cheat. We're going to talk a lot about his chart later when we come onto the planet Pluto, because he is a prime example of the archetype of Pluto. For now, I'm just highlighting him as being an earth person who was very obsessed with results and, in his case, winning. He has his sun in Virgo, moon in Virgo. So he's a double earth sign, double Virgo, and his ascendant is Scorpio, which is a water sign. But a lot of earth, and also like Virgo is the sign of like attention to detail and the minutiae of things. And very interesting if you've ever seen the interviews of him, when he admitted his cheating and described how he did it, it was in a very Virgoan way, so precise, so detailed. And, he kind of made the point that everyone was cheating. He was just better at it because he had such attention to detail, which is his Virgo nature. He has a super interesting chart. And like I say, we're going to come back and look more in detail at that later. Just continuing the introduction to the elements. So the 3 air signs are Gemini, Libra, and Aquarius. And a bunch of air keywords for you. Fundamentally, air is the realm of social and intellectual. So air is associated with air is the life energy associated with the prana or the breath. Air is about connection and interchange. It's about relating. And so the nature of the element of air is about having distance between it, so there can be a relationship between 2 people or 2 things. And so someone with a lot of air, it generally gets expressed in one of 2 ways. One is the mind, the thought, the intellect realm of the air. So somebody who loves learning, someone loves studying. In its lower form, someone who's just a gossip or an airhead, somebody, but it's about the exchange and interchange of ideas and information, which aren't always practical. Earth is the practical. Air is just being attuned to the ideas for the sake of ideas and learning for the sake of learning. I'm thinking of 2 friends of mine, a couple who one is an air sign, one is an earth sign, and they together have studied so many different things and learned about a lot of things. And the one who's the earth actually uses it and practices as a healer in different modalities. And it's like, what am I going to do with all this learning? The air person has no interest in that. He's just like, I just want to learn about it for the sake of learning about it because it's interesting to me. And that's it. I don't want to do anything about it. So, ideally a person has some air and earth together in their chart. So there's a bit of both. Or they get together with an earthy person so that together the 2 people can express not just the ideas, but the practical expression. The other aspect of air is social. So it's about interrelationships between people. So air people, and especially Libras, although it can also go for all air signs, can be particularly people-oriented and particularly suited to realms that's about relationships between people, interactions between people. So social and intellectual. And the realm of air in and of itself is very rational and logical and objective. It's somewhat detached. Remember I said at the beginning when I was talking about science, the realm of science falls within the astrological symbolism. Science could be said to be related to the element air. It's objective, it's rational, it's logical, and there's huge value in that. And it's important. And it's not the whole picture when it comes to what this world, this life, this being human is all about. But yeah, air people are often very good in a crisis because they can remain detached and objective and not have their own sort of personal feelings get so involved in a situation. My example for an air person from the realm of communication, air people having something to say to the world, is this guy, John Lennon, who was a double air. So John Lennon's sun in Libra here, and his moon was also in an air sign, moon in Aquarius. So very much about the realms of communication as being, on a general but important level, something that he was here to do and express in the world. And, you know, particularly the sign of Libra being all about peace and balance and harmony. That's the Libran realm. But interestingly, he's also got Aries rising, the opposite to Libra, Aries being kind of associated with the god of war. If you ever read anything about his personal life, he wasn't necessarily all peace, love, and harmony in his personal life. Somewhat shown by Aries also being prominent in his chart. But yeah, fundamentally having something to say to the world, here to communicate something. And to complete our run through the 4 elements, water, Cancer, Scorpio, and Pisces. Water, in a way, opposes air in that air is objective and rational and logical. Water is subjective and about feelings and emotions. And so, you know, whereas air is about distance, the realm of water, if you think of the physical qualities of water, it just sort of merges with whatever space it's in. It has no boundaries or structure of its own. And so that's kind of symbolic of the feelings, and somebody of a strong water nature, it's like being attuned to the more sensitive undercurrents of life, and where there's less sort of separation and boundary, in a sense, where like feelings merge and dissolve into one another. So water people's gift is their tremendous sensitivity, often operating by instincts on their feelings, being able to emotionally connect with others, a desire to kind of merge with another. And often, certainly in its higher form, extremely caring, extremely empathic, because of literally being able to feel what someone else is feeling. The lower side of that is being extremely sensitive, sometimes moody or illogical because of overwhelming emotions and feelings. And there's one person that epitomizes the water realm so much more than anyone else I've ever come across. He is the true embodiment and archetype of water, and it's this guy. In case you don't recognize him, Kurt Cobain, the former lead singer of Nirvana, who committed suicide at the age of 27 and wrote in his suicide note, "I'm too sensitive for this world." If you look at his chart, it's truly incredible. I'm going to run through very quickly. So here's his sun in the sign of Pisces. His Mercury is in Pisces. His Venus is in Pisces. His Saturn is in Pisces. All in water. Cancer, the other water, his moon is in Cancer, his Jupiter's in Cancer. And the other water sign, Scorpio, his Mars is in Scorpio. So other than his ascendant, which is in earthy Virgo, every single one of the planets that counts is in a water sign. So his entire chart is basically water. And that gives the gift of, you know, water's often sort of attuned to that, like that sensitive undercurrent of life. Water is often associated with the great artists, often the kind of troubled genius, you know. And Pisces is kind of in itself the sort of spectrum of junkie to mystic and everything in between. It's like tremendous sensitivity to the world. And so, you know, what was his gift in terms of his music and his artistic abilities, all of this water and sensitivity, was also really his downfall of, I mean, in his own words, being too sensitive for this world. Even most people with a lot of water in their charts will at least have planets in other elements, but he has nothing other than his ascendant. All of the planets in the same element makes for a very imbalanced chart and just very difficult to kind of function in this physical world because of just feeling everything so strongly. Yeah, and just to say, in discussing the traits in these elements, there's always a degree of generalization, as with everything in astrology. Not everyone will embody all of the traits of their main element, and different factors can compensate when you get more detailed. For example, if somebody has no earth in their chart, but has a very prominent Saturn, what it means to have a prominent planet, I'll talk about next time, but to have Saturn being prominent in your chart can kind of compensate for no earth in a way, because what Saturn symbolizes are some of those same themes of practicality and hard work and groundedness that earth represents. So, there are ways of compensating for one's elemental balance. However, just this and looking at, where someone has a lot of one element or nothing of one element will say a lot about their essential outlook on life. Somebody with no earth, for example, is very often completely impractical with the mundane side of life. So either really bad with money, not that they don't earn money, but they can't keep hold of it, or struggle with routines and the sort of, the more mundane, practical, kind of boring side of life. Somebody with no fire may struggle to get motivated to get things done. They may struggle with like literally physical energy and vitality. And where you have a total lack of an element, sometimes it's people overcompensate for this sort of unconscious lack. Two people that I know that have no fire in their chart. One, he's kind of lazy, actually. I mean, super happy guy, but no motivation to achieve anything in life. Just happy, kind of drifting by, not really doing anything. Totally content with that. The other person with no fire is insanely driven and motivated. He's a hardcore mountaineer who's climbed Everest. But it seems to be kind of coming from this unconscious sense of lack of, I have to force myself to achieve because, on some level, there's this actual apathy to life. And so it's like overcompensating to make things happen. Where there's a lack of an element, people can kind of go to those two extremes. More common is the first example, in my experience, but either is possible for a person. So, no water, either completely shut down and emotionally cold or extremely emotionally sensitive, but finds it difficult to have a healthy outlet for those feelings. Again, both sides are possible, but usually there's quite an extreme version of one or the other where there's a lack of an element. So let me get myself back on screen. Am I back? You can see me rather than the screenshot. So amazingly, that's the first 2 hours done already. So it's a fitting place to end it for now. But this is, class 1 of 5, just beginning, and a brief introduction to the elements. And, the further we go through this course, the more the little bits that I'm saying will start to fall into place, and there'll be more context for what I'm saying. I recognize that at the beginning, it's more theoretical until we get into more specifics. And that will happen little by little as we go on. I'm happy to hang around for a little bit right now if anyone has any particular questions or comments that they want to share, either through the webcam or through the chat box. Anything you want to say at this point, please do so. I'll give you a couple of minutes to, in case something suddenly appears to you. And if not, then class is dismissed for today. And I will see you all same time next Saturday.